So good morning, Doug.
Good morning. Good morning.
Let me adjust my video here. Otherwise, it's mostly going to get my ceiling. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. Well, it's still 3 minutes. I'm going to actually fill up my water bottles.
I'm going to go fill up my tea mug.
These two. Water bottles filled up.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Morning, Tammy.
How are you doing, Sam?
As I was just mentioning to Doug, I'm still somewhat impressed by the surge in activity in this group. It's pretty cool, and some pretty interesting questions are being asked, and some pretty interesting insights and other people's wisdoms. And like you say, Tammy, in your long post, there's so much to just follow up on. And, you know, if you're really present with all of it, it takes a long time to get through, you know? One of the things I didn't even have time to talk about last call, which I wanted to, was talk about how I wanted to essentially take some of these ideas and start plugging them into a GCC brain. I actually started that, but it's not ready for exposure yet. I think you guys are familiar with...
Can you say more about what the GCC brain means?
Are you familiar with thebrain.com, Doug?
Oh, yeah, I love it. You have no idea.
Oh, great. I mean, I've had, I used to use it a lot up until it lost a lot of my data, and then I got very disappointed. But I think despite that, I've been away from it for 2 years now, and I still like the way it works, so I'm going to go back to it. But if you go to collaborology.info, there's the beginnings of a collaborology brain that is still, of course, work in progress. So, of course, a GCC brain would be those memes and ideas and connections and associations and insights and whatever that come out of these discussions and or associated thinking out of my, often, like one cylinder brain. So I'll just get it in there as I can. Tammy, are you familiar with the brain?
Yeah. Yeah, that came across my screen maybe 3, 4 years ago through, I think it was the, it was through an indigenous network of folks that were, hey, there's Harry.
Hey, Harry.
Yeah. So anyway, I have had a walkthrough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to finish up that thought, I had my first encounter probably in the early 2000s. You know, it's definitely before 2005. So it's been on again, off again, on again, off again for me. The last time being, I was just astonished that so much data got lost. Now, it could have been me, could have been that, but, you know, I just did the blame thing, and so went away from the blame for 2 years. Brain for 2 years. Now I'm coming back.
Hi, Harry.
Hi.
Unidentified flying objects?
Yeah, I thought, what are they talking about? I got my first encounter in 2000. I thought this must be a close encounter of the third kind.
We're talking about the brain.
The brain, yours or mine?
Actually,
or to put it differently, a large topic or a small one?
Thebrain.com.
The software platform.
Oh yeah, well, okay, yes. I looked at it years ago, but I didn't get into it.
I think everybody has that remark.
It singularly, hands down, is the best kick-ass operable, like everything one could want for real-time, like capture and generative process. And the fact that it's not open source and the fact that the company behind it has been coming from proprietary place has prevented it from being literally, I think, the tool that would be on every desktop today had they just like not done that. I found out about it the minute it emerged, which was through Kurzweil.net and Wired, and when they first invented it. And it's just unbelievably easy and powerful. So
you use it?
Well, my history is identical to Sam's, except without data loss. Like I've never lost anything, but I did drift from it because it's just not collaborative unless you pony up, and it gets expensive. Hello, Anna.
Sorry, yeah, the collaborative aspect is $300 a year per person.
I know, it's insane. It makes it untenable.
Yeah, not for groups like us.
Aha.
Anna, we're talking about a tool called the brain. And essentially what it does is it allows you to spatially lay out ideas and connect things together in a visual space. But it's expensive, so, and proprietary. So, and Sam also lost a bunch of data, so he got pissed off at it and walked away for a couple years, and now he's back.
Because unfortunately, I can't find anything nearly as good, so I'm going to bite the bullet. And now I'm going to be much better about my backup strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you lose your brain, you're lost.
That's what happened. I lost my brain, literally.
I put something in there. I started with something called Plectica.
Yes, I saw that. I'm going to investigate that. Part of what prompted me to talk about the brain is because you posted that about Plectica, whatever.
Yeah, well, I'm a visual thinker, and I'm still looking for a good way to post images and then take pieces of the image and take links out of them and talk through via the images and not the story, because we think visual. So I would like to have like an overview and then zoom into that one and go from that one through a storyline. So I'm experimenting, but I like this better than what I have seen before. If the brain could do that, I would be interesting. But it's also always text-based, and I don't think text-based.
You can actually put attachments and images on the brain, and it actually does not let you lay out things very easily. It does, but then you have to like specifically, disable the default, formatting mechanism. So it has a default that just does what it wants to do.
Yeah, it is like this. All those, what's the name for those diagrams? They splash out whatever when you change something.
Yeah, not really a mind map, but it's something like a mind map.
Heat map? No, that's different. There's not another word.
No, it's not. Anyway, hi Glenn, hi Anna.
Hi Glenn. I've seen Glenn in the conversational experiment yesterday. What was a great conversation, didn't you think so, Glenn?
Yeah.
I'll mute myself while I have some soup.
I usually can't be there on Wednesdays, but yesterday I could.
Yeah, just for the record, I have another thing that now conflicts with the conversational experiments time. It's the planning activities for the Doug Engelbart 50th anniversary celebration coming up in December of 2018. So I'm attending half of those, half the other, and yesterday was the Doug 50 event.
Yeah, that's another collaborative challenge that we would like to automatically align agendas to our optimal interests, so that Kai, you could push us, Fleming and his club forward, and Doug Engelbart back automatically. I would love that.
I agree with you, except for the word automatically.
Okay.
I wonder if we can have some sort of grounding exercise and intending exercise for today's session.
Oh, before we get into that, would someone else like to volunteer to also record?
And are you recording in speaker view or?
I'm in gallery view right now.
Okay. It's nice if another person.
Was that the Lost, that one recording from Tuesday?
No, it turned out I believe it was all there. If you saw that I actually posted 2 parts, but I think I got it all.
Yeah.
I was surprised, even though I thought that it had crashed.
Anna, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, I watched that and it was all there. So, yeah, it was good.
Wow, that's quite an investment of time, Anna.
It was worth it. It was very rich.
So back to Tammy's question about the grounding activity.
Do you want to enlarge a bit on what that means?
Just we could do something where we just did a little check-in of what we might want to focus our attention on today. And there's a good friend of mine that does creative facilitation work, and a few months ago I was looking to kind of integrate some of those pieces, which are just asking a simple question that is kind of fun, allows us to kind of arrive into the space together. It gives each person an opportunity to put something into the common space. It can be as simple as, I think what I used before was, if your passion for being here were an animal, what would it be? And it kind of just points to, what something that we collectively want to know about each other. Or, go ahead, Sam.
I don't really want to interrupt. I was just signaling that I will talk after you're done.
Yeah, just a way for us to all kind of arrive in the same space and have a shared moment of being able to intend together about what we want to explore today. So if your reason for being here today were a mode of transport, a way of moving, what would it be? Or something like that. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. But I like the introduction of movement, because we are a experiment in motion. Does that feel like a good thing to do? Sam, did you want to put your piece in?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to do. It gives us a way to sort of inject some different kind of perspective into things. And the question that came to mind as you just raised that was, if we were all in one place with a common activity that drew us there, other than GCC, what might that be? That was another question I came up with. And you know, the picture that came to mind is a clearing in the forest for me and we dancing like Wiccan witches.
We could combine those.
Do you want to combine that, Harry? Great. Do you want to wordify that?
Wow.
Wordify? What's wordify?
That's a nice word.
Put words around it?
Well, let me just lead by example, as they call it. I would love to meet you all on the dance floor, and I would come by bike.
Well, I like the idea of coming into the forest and dancing in the nude around like witches, yes, around the fire. And I would come on horseback.
Wow, Anna, I was going to add one remark to my comment saying I was going to come by horse and buggy. And I forgot to add the naked part.
I don't know well what vehicle I would come with. Today I'm just a little tired, but in a good way. I think I like the sitting by the fire, just looking at the fire and listening in and watching the other people dance. Maybe just take it as it comes. I don't have any special plans or wishes. I'm just glad to just be here. So, yeah.
I'd come with graham crackers, marshmallows, and Hershey's chocolate bars.
That would be your mode of transport?
I think I'd come walking barefoot.
Mm-hmm. I would that sacred dancing circle sounds awesome, and I would there's a heart place that I would inhabit there. I'm just trying to think of how to express that, but I would want to carry a place of open, present heart space. And yeah, sure, barefoot, walking. Sorry for taking that, Doug, but that resonated. Harry,
You could walk together. Sounds awesome.
Tammy and Doug are walking together barefoot, and Anna and I are going by horse.
I see us all gathering around this great fire, all naked, ready to dance in the middle of the forest. And I think we're a bunch of romantic hippies. That's what we are.
Okay, all right. Since you mentioned that, here we go.
I wish I could do that.
How long is your hair? How long is your hair, Sam?
I don't know. Probably about down to like my shoulder blades, maybe.
I had long hair a few years ago.
I had long hair a few decades ago.
Usually in my entire life, it's been very short up until about a few years ago, my boss came to me, and he's a couple years older than me, and said he wanted to grow his hair out long, but he didn't want to be the only one. He wanted to see if I would do it with him. So we both did it, and I haven't stopped, and he's trimmed it, so it's not as long as mine anymore.
So that's interesting, Sam, that you sort of became a different person for him, externally anyway.
I've never thought much about that. And now I ask my kids, should I cut it, my beard? Should I cut my beard and my hair? And Veronica says no, she likes it. Gail too, she says she likes it.
So one of the things that I'm really excited about is and curious about is how we make decisions about what gets talked about next. So I wonder if we can unpack that a little bit, or create some understanding of the devices of movement, of how we choose that and how we do that.
Shall I start again? When I lived in Antwerp, I went dancing at least once a week, 5 rhythms on Monday and some free dancing on barefoot dancing on Saturday, and sometimes more, sometimes less. And it's a very good way for me to arrive here and now and in my body and out of my free floating brain. And I decided that I would not only go if I can do the distance on a bicycle. Sometimes it was a challenge, like an hour ride, but mostly I could do it in like half an hour, which is great. So I go there and then I'm already kind of in my body. And when I go home, I have a nice amount of time to kind of arrive home without going all happy into a car and then arrive home like that. So and I like that way of living. And also a bike is about the most effective means of transport that I know. Hardly any, no costs except a cup of coffee every day now and then and all that. So I'm all for an ecological way of transport, and this is one of the most efficient ways I know. With that, I'm complete for the moment.
You're lucky that you're in a country which makes way for bicycles. You have a lot of bicycle lanes, I think, and it's flat and it's very popular there. Here, people are sort of squeezed to the side of the road. And yeah, I mean, I used to ride. I don't ride anymore, but it was always a bit hairy, scary.
I know. I read about it, but there's a development going as well. As you can see, I saw YouTube movies from people in London, and we have the advantage of electrical bike these days. So the hills shouldn't be a problem, and the rest is a matter of the big change in culture we are creating right here.
Yeah.
Well, what to talk about? It just occurred to me today I don't have any special thing I want to talk about. Some days there's just something that wants to come out, and now it's sort of just fine listening and taking it as it comes. But I wonder if anyone else has any questions or special things they feel is important, maybe. If one person has, then I would expect probably it is important.
Well, I actually heard something else in Tammy's question, so I'm hoping Tammy's still there. And that is, it seems to be in the real-time conversation mode. How do we sense who's ready to talk? How do we sense, how to follow up on the last utterance? And for me, the difficulty comes in if people actually say more than one meme or respond to more than one meme in an offering. Let's say I talk now and I bring up 4 points, right? And then someone decides to respond to either point number 4 because it's the most recent, or 4 and 1 because that's what they know about. And then 2 and 3 actually are still hanging. But then, maybe person C says, oh, well, I like what Harry said about 0.4 and 0.1, and here's my offering, which is 0.5. And now 2 and 3 are still hanging. And then 5 minutes later, I may go back and say, hey, but 0.2 was kind of important, and that's why I wanted to say it. So there's all these tangles and, dead ends in conversation, which is one way of hearing Cammie's question of what do we choose to talk about next. That's separate from what do we come to this meeting that's burning in the back of our minds that we really want to talk about and bring to this group and get other people's feedback on, which is again different from what are the big topics that we as a community want to address, which is again one way of saying what do we want to talk about. So I think there's at least 3 levels and probably more of considering Cammie's question. And for me, right now, the most interesting one is the first one I brought up, which is in the moment, in real time, how do we follow up on things? And now here, I just brought up 3 points, A, B, and C. Let's see which one gets followed up.
I would like to do procedures first and then content.
What does that mean, Harry?
Well, first, how do we do it? And then when we have a way of rules on the road, norms, structures, whatever you want to name it, then we know how to follow each other. And then it's easier to have a conversation that makes sense to everybody. Is that clear for you, Tammy?
Yeah, I mean, bringing Sam's piece, 0.1, and being careful not to bring points 4, 5, and 6, and 7 of my own. I need to talk about specific content because he's talking about content in a way. So yes, because that conversation will feed into what potential procedures. So in this moment, I'm trying to get my point out. I'm trying to feel what wants to be said and sense the will of the group according to what I can see and feel. So there's this kind of group visual and auditory sense making that I'm doing while listening to my inner voice to be able to contribute what I feel is relevant. And that's the decisions that I can make. But we're a collective here. And so anyone else can then pick up the ball and take it somewhere else. Now, what that is creating is a group field and a group way of being able to move in a direction together. And part of what happens is that we get tugged off into areas where people want to understand better. And so we go into what might feel like a red herring, but is useful. So what I've noticed is that it's an internal gauge that we're all working from. Each of those gauges is different. So I'm not sure how to go straight to procedures, which is why I'm speaking content, I think. Doug, you were unmuted.
So I'd like to throw Gremlin in the machinery of sorts. And I'll confess to a bias that I've ended up with, which is a preference always for the emergent. So until there's a reason or need to co-create and enact a protocol in the face of an experiential need or challenge or issue, protocols don't need to be as abstract ideas or preconditions or first steps. I've gotten to a place where I've sort of jettisoned the idea that agreements in that realm, unless disassociate from context and actual experiential exchange, interaction, collaboration, don't have value to me. They become sort of artifacts and baggage. It's like over time they build up, and it's sort of like trying to work in oil, or in sludge. But when there's a real thing like that comes up, and it's like, I want to, Sam's issue about 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to raise 1 and 2, and then, okay, let's figure out how we could do that. Like, how could we respond to that, create, and innovate something for that issue, like that idea, that challenge. But it's driven and motivated by the situation, context, circumstance, thing. It's driven by the need. So I just wanted to add that to the pile. And I'm complete.
So I would say that the protocols are already being followed, regardless of whether we're conscious of them or not. Simply the fact that we're all letting a single person talk, mostly without interruption. I know there have been exceptions. Is one example of a protocol. And so, we've all learned this from other contexts and brought it here and honed it here, I'm hoping. Others are, maybe we speak, without getting animated and emotional. Maybe we speak without getting, fiery, maybe. I haven't seen too many people, pound their desks and jump up and down. So that's a unstated protocol. Another is, we don't seem to come to these meetings naked. That word has been used all the time. So that's another part of the protocol. So there are a bunch of things that we've already kind of, put into the water that we don't sense. And I don't think it's inappropriate to look at them. I think it's, good to understand what they are, because again, I don't have this stifling notion of protocol. I think everything that we decide to adopt is available for improvement. But I do agree with Tammy that I would prefer, and Doug, I expected you to use the V word, by the way. I thought you would say, hey, let's figure out what our values are. Like, do we value hearing someone? Do we value sharing? Do we value group insight? Do we value respect? Do we value mutual understanding? All those V kinds of notions before we talk about the C, and then derive the right P, which is the protocol. Again, that's my 2 cents for now.
Well, I totally agree with Doug that if we've got something that we want to talk about, if we feel there's a need, and we need to work out some sort of a protocol because it's not happening in the way we would like it to happen, then fine. But otherwise, doing it in the abstract doesn't feel useful. But I would say the same thing about values. It doesn't seem to me to be useful to talk about value abstract, even if we try to define in detail the words that we are using so that we're actually on the same page. Don't we have something that we really want to talk about that is pushing us, that is really, that we're really motivated to talk about? I mean, otherwise it sort of feels like it's a bit dilettante.
I think there is an undercurrent of that sense of need in a few of us. And I do think that we are dilettantes. I think we're extremely privileged to be able to do this. And even more so to be able to spend that luxurious time of talking about how we want to do this. That's not a thing that happens, in most other forums. And so given the chance that we do want to do this and we do want to talk about how we do this, I think we should take that as an immense responsibility. Because we don't get to do this very many other places. And we're trying to see, I mean, in the back of our minds is still this notion of the global governance model that's kind of pulled us all here. Now, we individually may say, oh, that's either relevant or irrelevant now, you know, we're something else. But that is the thing that pulled us here together in the first place. So in the back of my mind is still, what is our path towards a governance model, maybe not yet global, but could work and then could then scale. And that includes agreements among ourselves, agreements including protocols, agreements including how do we remember what we said. So representations of what we said, records of what we said, and how do we interact with that? And how do we set up, you know, ways for new people to come into this community? So those are the questions I think that have been in the back of the conversation, in the back of my mind, and I think you've heard some of these questions, you know, repeated before. So I don't think that there's been a lack of this need. And I think it's just another way of coming around to it. By the way, Tuesdays, I think, are an opportunity to really, truly focus on that. So I wasn't really anticipating this day to be focused on this question, but I think it's kind of emergent, as Doug says. Over.
I noticed a little thing to what you said there, Sam, that with many groups that I've been in, there is this original purpose which brought the group together, and it seems to sort of linger in the back of the minds. And but I like this global governance. I think that's a good one. Good one. There's one little thing was on the back of my mind, and it was I began talking about it in one of the talks, but it's a little bit about the differences between writing and speaking. And a question which came to me was if it's possible in speaking to sort of briefly formulate my relation to the bigger picture and the purpose of why I'm here today, if that's possible. It reminds me of like when a few of the new people came in and we were asked to introduce ourselves. That was quite interesting. Just a short introduction, and it seems that that's an important skill at the very least, and it's maybe one of those things that I would like to come back to again and again, and sort of the bigger picture being tied to why I'm here. How can I say? The purpose of why I'm here now in relation to the larger context, if that can be formulated in a relatively brief way, at least that seems like it's something which is very interesting to explore when speaking. Just an idea.
And Gertrude has talked about that as well. Just little introduction games kind of thing. Like, I am going to introduce myself differently today than I did last week or last year. Because in fact, I'm a different person, and the context in which I'm introducing myself is specific. So, you know, when we don't have anyone new here, we don't have that opportunity. And I think it is good to have some kind of context grounding question that does bring us together to have a starting point where we're all doing the practice of putting something into the middle to see what's emergent. So I think that I loved those introductions so much because I learned something different about each person. And I think it's a good muscle to work for us, because we are trying to kind of explain a lot quickly, and how we identify ourselves in relationship with where we are, I think, is a really beautiful thing to support the unfolding of the emergent in a simple action. So in terms of like knowing when next to speak, and that both internal and external guidance system that we're experiencing in this emergent practice. Sam, one of the things that I took in from what you shared was, if there's 4 points, now you've probably opened your pipe too much and put too much, like as a person, if I put out 4 points, I should stop at 1 so that can be responded to. And part of what I think we're learning how to do is to do that navigation and hold more as a group. And so anyway, I realized I was moving out from point 1 to point 3 and 6. So I guess I'll stop talking.
I actually love that. And that, for me, that really, where you just went floats my boat, which is, as a practice and in service to connection, understanding, communication, what's behind the desire to do 1, 2, 3, 4? And by the way, I'm of that church. I'm guilty of that. I work really hard to stop, and very often don't. But that idea that, one at a time, give everybody a chance, and part of the intention of, in sharing or contributing, to enable the sort of maximum generative awareness potential understanding to happen, that just sounds like a really good idea. As something being made explicit, that isn't traditionally, that isn't part of our, we're not that fine-tuned in the way people talk to each other. We're not that sort of aware and disciplined, for want of a better way of putting it. But that really, really resonates as an insight and as an idea. And I'm complete.
I know Anna had something to say, so please, Anna, but I would also raise my hand.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just getting a feeling of what is emerging here, and it really feels good, actually. This idea of how we couch, how we present whatever ideas we have. First of all, limiting time. I think quite often people say more than they need to. So how do we make everything concise and really to the point? And I think the idea of making 1 point and then allowing other people, that would be a good way to start. Okay, complete.
Okay, I'm going to sound pokey again. I really don't intend to this time, but in some ways, I do agree, because it helps the flow of the conversation. But in other ways, I kind of disagree, because I take a look at these recordings as more than just the real-time interaction. These are recordings that more and more actually are being viewed offline by others. And so if 4 people have spoken before I can get my response to one point, there's probably point 1, point 1A, point 1AB, point 1ABC that people have contributed to. And I would have reflections on the entire thread before my turn comes around. And I also realized that it'll probably be another 6 or 7 turns before I get to say my next offering. So sometimes I do include 2, 3, or 4 points when I say, hey, I have 2 things to say or 3 things to say, whatever, simply to get that on the record, because I know that I will be coming back to this record, or someone else might be coming back to this record, and then actually say, okay, Sam had this view on those 4 people who spoke before him, and that might be worthy. And I do want to make sure that that is an opportunity, because if I don't get to see it, because we are time limited and because my brain may not remember it all, and we're not actually putting things into the written chat transcript, all of us, it could get lost. So possibly another thing to do is put it into the chat transcript, or just say, hey, I'm going to log it here, and it may or may not get followed up, but at least I know it's there and it can be followed up. So that's one way of expressing a little bit of dissent, which is not really disagreement, but it's just another thing that is enabled. And I know I've said more than one thing this time. Over.
But also, Sam, what I feel is you've put it in an abstract way again, so that this is not an actual experience that you're having.
It's actually a very real experience.
Right now?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, then it would have been lovely if you could have made it explicit in what it was.
Explicit. Was this not explicit?
No. Were there some points that came up that you were not able to address? You see, what it feels to me that this is sort of anxiety about something.
No, Anna. This happens in every conversation for me. Every conversation.
But for this conversation now,
yes, we're talking about how we have conversations.
Okay.
I just want to throw some tidbits into this, and this is actually perfect. George Poor, I don't know whether any of the folks here are familiar with George and his work in Enlivening Edge, but he and I did some noodling around a construct of his called chaotic chat, and it was an attempt to try to put on like this issue, right? And it mapped to certain practices for me, but the thing you're raising, Sam, which I used to experience all the time, like I was constantly in a state of frustration, basically, ended up being about presencing and choice in presencing. Because if I could let go of the need or drive or imperative to speak or to contribute or to say something, and just be 100% present in a receiving mode, meaning I don't have processing and thoughts, and I'm not sort of in my head in response. I'm in presence in listening. That like 85% of the stuff that I wanted to say didn't need to be said, or wasn't relevant, or wasn't necessarily of interest to anybody else in the long run of it, like over time. And so I had to really dig into my attachment to why was what I wanted to say such an imperative? Like what was that really about? As an internal issue, meaning that's about me. It's not about the conversation. And so I wanted to share that just because what I see in you that I see in me. It's like, Boy, can I relate. And we're making explicit and subjecting to light stuff that doesn't get this kind of care and attention and treatment. This is generative. Like what we're doing right now is really generative, because everybody's in a much more primitive place in terms of just going past all of this stuff. And when you start getting down to the nitty gritty of, you know what, one sharing or idea at a time really might make a lot of sense when we've actually gotten to a place where we're opening up the space and the recognition that everybody needs a beat to take it in, and everybody should have an opportunity to, you know, respond or contribute before we move on or before we pile on. So this is like, you know, making, you know, surfacing to conversation level these questions like ain't going on anywhere. It's just not happening. And this is like, you know, how do we talk to each other 101? Or how do we do it in a way that's more powerful, generative, effective? So, anyway.
I've also noticed, by the way, Doug, that often when I've been in that situation, when I have something in my mind I want to say, but then I just try to be present, very often someone else says it. Very often. That's really weird. So it's like I don't have to say it because they've already said it.
And I think that that's the effect of presencing, right? Like if we're really present, then that is in the field, and we can all, you know, there are different ways that that will be expressed. And just in noting how Sam was talking over Anna in that moment, just as a thing to look at.
I was talking over him.
Pardon me?
I was talking over Sam.
Well, you were
That's
speaking
what I
first.
saw.
You were speaking first, Anna.
Okay.
And
I responded to Anna without interrupting her. And Anna acknowledges that she did interrupt me, which I did feel, which is why we were both piling on each other.
Yeah.
And I noticed your grimace at that, Tammy. And I noticed that you only notice when I interrupt Anna, but you do not notice when Anna interrupts me.
I definitely interrupted Sam.
Great. So I'm grimacing because the sound is such, and I can't hear either of you.
And I apologize for that.
So for me, what that points to is a place where quite obviously someone isn't being heard, right? And that's another part of this challenge that then starts to feel personal. And then there's an emotional reaction. So I'm just noticing.
But also, like, sometimes interruptions can be great. I feel that it works very well to interrupt, just kick something in quickly. But it is more demanding on Zoom because of the sound. If I'm physically in a room with someone, we interrupt each other all the time. It's very natural in a friendly conversation. But it's more demanding here.
So I will have to admit that in my understanding, interruptions degrade the generative possibility. And I also believe interruptions aren't Bohmian in the sense of Bohmian dialogue. So I usually don't interrupt. But when I notice that someone feels that interruptions are okay, then that's when I do it, kind of to be a little bit pokey. Yes, I do agree that. And there's a bit of ego there. Yes, I recognize it. And I do feel that I wasn't being heard. I felt that there was this implicit agreement already within the group that single point, move on, single point, move on was the protocol people seemed to want to gravitate towards. And I was trying to express an alternate value, which was the value beyond the real-time conversation here, that is something that, you know, could be followed up later. And I don't feel I was heard. I felt that I was interrupted. I felt that that was not valued. I felt that, you know, people just seemed to think that I was just being disagreeable. And that offering was really meant to be sincere in saying, hey, there is alternate value here in considering a different protocol rather than one thought, one utterance. Over.
Can we go back? Are you okay with going back to that point? Because the point that I was trying to make about the fact that you were responding with an abstract idea rather than actually saying, but there was a point that got lost that I wanted to make and I couldn't make it because, and what I was saying was, that was an abstract idea. And it would have been, I think, very helpful if it had been an actual experience, a real experience at that point of something that got lost. Then we would have seen, it would have been a demonstration of what you were saying. But it felt like what you were saying remained in the abstract as a possibility, and maybe as something that you've experienced before, but not something that you were actually experiencing at the moment. And so that's why it felt of less value to me. Finish.
Can I respond now? So yes, this is something I've experienced in every one of these conversations, because every one of these conversations, I note things of value that everyone says, and I have a take on that, which I don't necessarily hear from others in the subsequent conversation. And I'm sorry to use this sometimes, but let me just use one example. Glenn, sometimes when he speaks for quite a while. And there's usually, you know, several ideas in what Glenn says. And they're all worthy and they're all insightful and they all are well considered. And I would like to follow up on every one of them. So I guess number one, Anna, it's very surprising to me that you recognize this strictly as an abstract idea that has not happened before. And so that struck me as very surprising. And number two, it is a very real experience for me. I'm also a little bit hurt that you think that, you know, I just want to express abstract ideas and that they're not real for me. You know, these are very, very real. And that's why I think that I want to raise them. And they're, in my opinion, very much topics in collaborology. Over.
Okay, I can see that we've misunderstood each other. And I understand that you feel hurt because you feel that I was saying that your ideas were not based on a real experience. That wasn't what I was saying. I believe you have had real experiences of this, but that you didn't, at the point when you introduced this idea, it was based on past experiences, which are not totally abstract, but they are certainly less abstract, more abstract, less concrete than if you actually gave an example right at this minute of something. I mean, you gave an example of Glenn, but that's in the past too. anyway, I hope that I've made that clear, that there is a distinction. I don't know if I want to go on laboring this. I don't know whether anybody else is interested, but it feels to me important to see, because it actually links up with what Doug was saying about presence. If you're really here, then the actual experience that you're having of something that gets left out and is lost because you can't express it at the time, it would be really helpful to see that. But what we're left with is a feeling of having experienced this sort of loss and feeling like you need to be able to somehow make rules so that this loss won't happen again. And I understand that, you know, with a feeling of loss, we want to protect ourselves.
So this is where I can't disagree more, Anna. I'm trying to be so present that I have meaningful, constructive thoughts around what each of you say. And I have something to contribute around each of them. That's how present I am. And I don't want that to be lost. I'm not just concentrating on the last person, because then I would not be present with the person who spoke before. And I'm trying to capture that because it is so valuable. It is that value that I am trying to capture here, not just for this conversation, but for all other people who may take this recorded artifact and then decide to take other action to extract value from it. So I also, I guess, bristle at this notion that I'm not as present as you or anyone else. I really bristle at that notion. And by the way, I use another protocol, which is over when I'm done with my utterance. Over.
Good protocol. I think we have a different definition of what being present means, or presence, and that may take a long time to try and disentangle. But for me, presence is not having lots of ideas about what somebody is saying or responses, you know, that you're being present is just being in the present. How do we do that? There is no how to. Being in the present is just being in the present. And I don't think we can describe it more than that.
But can it not manifest differently for different people? Because I feel that's the issue here. That it manifests differently.
Well, actually, I'm gonna sort of, you know, go meta, Glenn. The reality is, we're the world right now, and being in Sam's head, because I actually did see you as expressing it in the moment, full load, like I'm experiencing this now. There was nothing abstract about it for me, but then again, it's also like I recognize where you were, like I've been there. I understand that. But the question is, how do we create a container that enables both of those things to coexist and to support and facilitate Sam and his experience in the moment in terms of resources, tools, and mechanisms to capture generative flow that's like running at light speed off of the conversation and the flow of what's going on, and do that in a way that isn't at the expense of everybody being present and being in the moment and being in flow, right? Because that's sort of this linear thing, and it generally tends to get either disrupted or down to zero energy and momentum wise if it's not allowed to just go. And these two things are completely opposite vectors. It's like, and they're both equally and critically important and valuable. and they're both happening in real time at exactly the same moment. And how do we deal with, like, what do we create to help with that? Is the question, is what comes up for me, right? It's like, because I don't think we can solve the you know, the sort of cognitive irreconcilability of those two actions, those two flows and realities in generative conversation. It's like, you know, I don't know what we do, but we should be able to figure out a way of at least making sure everybody in the moment is maximally good with where it's going and how it's happening for them. Like, how could both of you be happy in the moment where it's not, you're screwing the you're screwing the presencing flow, Sam, because of generative like stuff, and Anna isn't pissing on the generative parade for you because she's like, hey, I want to stay just present and in the flow here. Like, I don't want to divert to that crap. I'm not like, I'm about being here, not doing, or not not whatever. And both of those realities and preference and centers exist. And how do we do it together with that?
I just want to note that both Aaron and Harry put their hand up about 7 or 8 minutes ago. Just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, good to see Aaron here too.
Yeah.
Hello.
Aaron? Hi.
Hello. I've kind of been in a holiday abyss, somewhat kind of crawling out of the hole. So, hello. Well, yeah, if it's a good time for me to say, I just had a kind of a particular point, maybe from my experience. So I'm from Seattle, a Seattle native, but I've lived in London for years. And I actually think there might have been a real disagreement between Anna and Sam, but I actually, you know, there's a way of kind of saying things passively, which actually occurs differently in both cultures, but both cultures have a way of hinting at things passively. But it's actually a very different nature of passiveness, which is interesting. There are different forms of passive aggressiveness, believe it or not. There's not just one kind. So I think that might have been, you know, I don't want to just write everything off there and say, oh, both of you, none of it meant anything. I'm not saying that. But I think that could have been about 50% of it based on my experience. And that difference can wind up just fueling whatever the actual real thing was there, right? So, and I think that might have even begun to happen as well, that it just started getting further and further apart off of something that, you know, maybe there was something real there, but the bulk of it was innocent. And then you start to drift. And, you know, as someone who has lived in both cultures for significant amounts of time. Yeah.
Could I add some Dutch remarks? I think I started suggesting we should talk about how we have this conversation. They say, no, let's do content. We are just doing what I suggested. That's my first conclusion for myself. I think that's necessary, but I also my experience, this is extremely slow and boring. So I want you to throw that in, and I could explain, and if you want to know more about it, but let me leave it at that for the moment. I considered leaving because, let me add this. In other groups, also, let's say high quality engagements, people speak as long as they need to speak, and then they're silent as they need to be silent. And what's the other one? I should make notes, and I didn't do that. Yes. It's led by attention. So if I become bored, that's a signal in itself. That's what I want to add. So I think we are losing quite a lot of time while we are gathering here to save the world and think about how to do that. With that, I'm complete for the moment. Over.
So going back to my original statement, I was trying to offer a perspective which might allow us to do something a little bit different than the one person, one utterance, one point meme. And it is driven by being present in hearing people where I have noticed that no one else has followed up on perhaps, let's say Anna's point number 2, right? So Anna's point number 2, if for the rest of the conversation was never followed up, I would feel perhaps that Anna would feel she wasn't heard on point number 2. And it may not be Anna, it could be Glenn, it could be Doug, it could be me, it could be Tanner, Harry, Eric. So it is a way of being able to signify that someone was heard. And that's what I mean by acknowledging, leaving it as a marker for subsequent follow-up, and just saying you were not ignored. That is one of the points I was trying to bring. And that, to me, is a way of being present in this conversation, not to let a point just fly by without acknowledgement. And so I do feel that, that is a different way of being present. And yes, we have not yet agreed on what being present means. And my last point in this missive is, I don't think I've ever come out and said, Anna, what you're saying is unimportant to me. But to me personally, and I'm taking this as a personal example because I experienced this and you wanted an experience that was personal. At least on 3 occasions now, I've heard you say something that I have said was unimportant to you. And if that's truly important for the rest of the group to understand, great, let's talk about that. But if it's truly unimportant just to you, without really understanding whether it's important to the rest of the group or not, then is that a fruitful way to follow up on this particular conversation? Maybe that's a way that you and I can do a one-on-one. And I would love to do that. So I'm really just wondering, what is achieved when you say this is not important for me, in response to me, and usually in interruption to me. Over.
I'm just going to take a moment to, in some of the conversational experiment.
Actually, could I hear Anna speak, please?
Sure, but I'm actually going to finish, absolutely, but I'm going to say what I'm going to say because I also feel like leaving, okay? So this emotional labor that we're going through right now, I feel like crying. My presence is saying, see you later, folks.
I think we should probably have a one-on-one, Sam, because it doesn't feel like anybody else is really interested in this exchange that we're having.
Then I think it's really unfortunate. Then we're not here to do what we're saying that we're here to do. This was really to understand these deep questions. If these deep questions make you leave, then what you said yesterday or the day before about I'm not quitting, you weren't sincere about that. And I do feel emotional about that.
Are you talking to me?
No, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking about everyone who said I'm not leaving in that poll that I put up either yesterday or the day before.
But isn't there something here about I have my experience, right? That's what I can talk about. Anna talked about your experience. Sam, you talked about your experience. Harry, you talked about your experience. Tammy talked about your experience. Now, I saw a little problem happening when I heard Anna project her experience over to Sam or something. And something started. But like, if we could just keep to this is my experience, what you just said now, I didn't quite understand that. And that makes sense. That's interesting. So it's a very subtle difference between saying I didn't quite understand that and saying that it's unimportant or something, because that doesn't seem like a fortunate way of formulating it. But if we could just formulate our own experience, then it's real. That's what we can bring. And then I don't see there's going to be a problem.
I still feel really concerned about two people who feel uninvolved in this exchange, and it doesn't feel right to pursue it at this point because of that.
I mean, this is exactly what the purpose of bringing this up is what do we want to talk about? I have limited time and attention, and I don't necessarily want to go and do the emotional labor of how of the experience between Sam and Anna. So your suggestions to have a one-on-one, I think that's great. But those things are present in our whole system, okay? And if they're not articulated or handled outside of this space, they will come up. And I do feel, you know, basically when Harry said what he said, I checked in with my body and I felt sad that Harry felt that way, but also resonant. And so I wanted to say that out loud.
I was just wondering if I could, you know, this is just an open question. Can I propose that, you know, can I propose that we can propose, and this is, you know, this is truly an innocent proposal, and please tell me if it's not a good proposal, but can I propose that we propose to, you know, maybe have like a just classic sociocratic vote on this and just ask whether or not maybe it's best if there's a one-on-one to follow up on that, which is dead. It's just purely a proposal. I'm not saying that's what we should do, and that maybe we could just adopt a sociocratic right now. Just an idea, not trying to wrench anything or redirect anything. So I guess my proposal is, should we use sociocracy, which is kind of a default thing? Yeah, that's just a first thing. We don't have to also. We can just make it a natural flow, because I also believe, you know, we can make it organic. It doesn't have to always be sociocratic thumbs up down. I think that would be, so that's maybe just one open question.
But Aaron, didn't they both agree to have a one-on-one? That's what I heard. I think it's a good idea, but like if they both agree, then.
Oh, okay.
What's the problem?
I didn't totally catch that. Maybe it would be useful for the future if we ran into another pothole like that then, or not that's a pothole. I wouldn't, or whatever, something that we think that maybe our time and attention could be elsewhere. That's it. Just an innocent point, not a point to feel bad or anything like that. Because I know there's some tension. So, yeah. Does anybody have any comments on that?
I do have something to say. And I know I've been saying a lot already today. But I'm saying this because I think it's useful for us as a community, not just because there's been this issue that stemmed from this instance of Anna and me having a disagreement. I say this because I'm a little bit sad that Tammy said what she just said about feeling sad for Harry when Harry felt bad about hearing this and it was boring. I didn't hear Tammy feel sad that I was interrupted and that I wasn't heard. I heard Glenn say that he felt some interruption came when, you know, Anna interrupted me. And I truly was trying to provide value to this group, this community. So I feel that there is, I don't know, a tendency, or maybe this is just my shadow coming in again, you know, very strongly. But there is this feeling in me that what I'm offering this group, the group doesn't want to hear. And yet, we keep saying to ourselves, oh, we're here to ask the hard questions. We're here to really understand how to have these conversations. I was addressing how to have these conversations. I was addressing how what people said didn't get dropped on the floor, which would happen if we adopted the one speaking, one, you know, meme idea. So I was trying to be present with what people were saying maximally without losing it. And that being heard. Over.
Sam, I heard you. I've seen you do this all, and I appreciate the work that you do. And continuing on the thread we are here in is that we are trying to talk our own truth, and I think that I'm trying to do that myself, and I invite all of you to do that. That we are present here as adults, and that of course we have our sensitivities, me as well, and that anything said is not meant as a personal or as a criticism. We're just adding whatever we can do in the pool, and you can do whatever you like. And it's a waste of time to say, well, okay, well, you did not appreciate me or you did not see me. And I know that I also am very sensitive to being heard and seen. And I think we all have had maybe not enough attention when we were young. At least I didn't have any. So it fully resonates with my personality. But I am here to practice being present the way I am and being generative. And I can clean up my own shit at my own time. And if I want one-on-ones with people to go too deep to dive in that, I will just as well. But this here is a group collaboration conversation, how to collaborate. And the process we are in is known as group dynamics, trying to feel and sense the rules of the road and what the sensitivities and all that and practicalities. And we're just kind of partly unconsciously fighting about, do we do it my way or your way, or is there a better way, and all that. So, and that's difficult, and that is by nature painful, but I don't mind that at all. With that, I'm complete. Over.
Well, what I've noticed is that this with being misunderstood may be a big theme, because at least for me, I haven't been used to being in circles with people with these interests, and it's been a painful thing over time. So if because what I heard Sam say, it made sense to me, but I can see that there's different ways of thinking, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to others. Like sometimes I say things and it makes no sense at all to others, and there is something painful about that. So at least I've noticed this pattern, that's maybe when we can get quite emotional, especially if someone projects something into our point of view, which we don't stand for ourselves. Then that's so maybe that's something we should be a little careful about. That's perhaps one good practice to speak my truth. Yeah, just like you said, that I totally agree with that. But then, you know, some minds work differently, and as long as we remember that, then sometimes you can say something and I don't understand it. It makes no sense. But then maybe I can think, okay, I'm just taking it in, and maybe it's gonna make more sense after a while. So that might help.
So Sam, you and I have some one-on-ones that we've been working on, and still some to do. And in part, that is to work out this point of tension that you are pointing to at the moment. So just to let the group know, Sam and I are doing that work. And one of the things that I'm devoted to practice to my capacity is to listen to understand rather than listen to make my point or be right. And part of why I wanted to look at how we decide what we're going to say next is because it's a fundamental, unseen, functional part of what emerges here. And I think it serves us to look at the mechanics of that somewhat. So when as Glenn just said, you know, when someone says something that you agree with all of this, but there's this part you don't agree with, oftentimes that's what's brought up, what's not agreed with. What I'm really excited about in these common spaces is to find the commonalities and navigate that way, so that we have a level of coherence that we're consciously navigating towards. But a natural form of the conversation that happens is we bring up what we either don't understand or that we take umbrage at, that we don't agree with. And so this creates this almost always off scenario. And I think that I've noticed that it's at cross purposes with my purpose for investing my time in it. And just as you said in one of your parts, Sam, you know, oftentimes the last thing that happened is what is reported. You know, the last thing, I felt a sadness. What was connected to that sadness was what happened with Harry, in him saying, this is boring, and I was considering leaving. That hit me, and I was reporting in that moment. I didn't talk about your experience in feeling shut down by Anna, by being interrupted and talked over. I didn't speak of Aaron's experience of coming into the conversation with a little bit of puzzled bewilderment, which is what I read a couple of times on his face, because that wasn't relevant to what I was expressing at the moment, which was a feeling of sadness that was triggered by what Harry. That doesn't mean that I don't feel that I don't feel you in the space. That's a big leap, and is an assumption that causes harm between your and my relationship that isn't based on truth. That's not how I feel. While recognizing that there are some tensions in how you and I each communicate that have caused, that would be great to get to the bottom of, so that we can better communicate and hold each other in these spaces. Because I feel that I have invested a lot in our relationship. I deeply respect you and your work, and I want to continue to support that.
That feeling and that value is very much mutual, as you know, about the amount of time you and I spend together on these calls. When we say we are here to do something new, do we really mean it? Because if we do what's comfortable, we're not going to push really what's new. We're just going to be back to what we have always done. And if we take an immediate response of, oh, that's not important to me, without really considering, or even just letting it go, you know, then what are we doing with these new ideas? We're shutting them down before they can actually even enter the room. And if we're really trying to do something new, we have to be able to deal with this discomfort. And we all said we're here. We all said we're not leaving. And I'm just saying, let's live that. Over.
I don't know. I'm just trying to, this is the work, right? And the natural feelings that arise in us are an important part of the collective emergent experience that we're all having, right? And we are all in it. So I'm not opposed to being uncomfortable, and I recognize that friction causes it creates the capacity for great growth, and this work can only be done in a group. It can't be done sitting on the mountaintop. And each one of our expressions is deeply important because it's showing something that is there but not being seen. So when Harry said, you know, I kind of felt like leaving, that was there but hadn't been seen before he said that. And I don't have more words, so I'll stop talking. I guess the point is that I was trying to get to was that there's so much that wants to be seen and heard. How do we navigate to that collective agreement or support for what wants to be emergent? And sweet, Harry.
These are two different things. I don't think we can define what wants to emerge. And I use a lot of mental models in trying to understand what's happening here. And I showed some of them online. What we are in my experience at this moment, is the green meme, as they say. It's all about being equal and being different at the same time. It's so about each acknowledging the other as being somebody else and honoring their right to be there just the way as I can be. And that's weaving networks, making connections, being together, all the things we are doing. But it's very much focused on the we space, on the being, and not focused towards action. And my impatience is because of the urgency of the current situation globally and also personally to come to a new behavior that is effective and makes me happy more easily. And that needs action. And I'm kind of trying to balance the both. And I think I have to stay very much connected, and I want to find really concrete ways of moving forward. But waiting to agree, I have learned, does not help. So I will do my own thing and share that. And in the trust that you are okay as well, just like me, and that you will do your thing. And then I don't have to discuss definitions anymore. I'll just share what I have to share and throw it into the group, like I'm practicing on Facebook and just on this new site I found. And so I'll just share what I learned and hope it's of value, and that's all I can do for the moment. And with that, I'm completely over.
Yeah.
I want action too.
Well, okay. One thing came to me when you said that, Terry, and I was that if we want to save time, I at least very strongly feel that it's incredibly important in these kind of conversations that when someone brings something, then the attitude should be that this is valuable, because if it's valuable enough for them to bring, then it's valuable. It comes from reality. It's real. It's real for them. So I'm not in a position to devalue any contributions of anyone else. So I don't actually see devaluation as being any part of a generative conversation, because this links very much to this idea of appreciation. If I can listen with an appreciative attitude, I try to understand as well as I can what's being brought. And if I can't understand it, maybe I just continue listening, maybe I ask a question, and that's also a reality and maybe appropriate to look into it. But there doesn't ever seem to be any need for anyone to say, well, what you said that was whatever, to devalue it, because it's real for them. So it is per definition valuable. And if I don't understand it, or if I don't feel that that's what I want to focus on, then I can, try to figure out what I want to focus on. And that comes back to this personal responsibility for what each of us brings. And if we can bring our own material, our own truth, just like you say, Harry, I totally agree. I feel very resonant with that. If we can speak our own truth, and then if that's a sort of collective agreement, then I think it's going to figure itself out, won't it? And then we can let everything emerge naturally. We don't have to know that. So I'm fine with yeah. Go ahead.
A thought just emerged in me. I want to share it for what it's worth. There is this saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I just thought value is in the experience of the receiver. So I don't need to value anything about you or whatever you bring. And if you say something and I think it's bullshit, then it's my value on your remark. And I would say it's great, it's the same thing. But that's what I decide, what value I give to whatever I receive. That's my thing to do. That's what I own. With that, I'm complete.
So I'm feeling that most of this conversation seems to be around what Sam saw me as saying, that I didn't value what he was saying. I think I was actually saying I felt it would be more valuable if it was a real experience that he was having at the moment. So I'm just trying to explain that. And now Sam has given a real experience that he's having at the moment, which is this disappointment that Tammy didn't pick up how he was feeling. That to me speaks to me much more than what I saw as the abstract way of talking about if at some point I feel points get lost, then I find that frustrating. So I don't think that really from, if anybody was to see on the outside, would they really feel that I wasn't feeling what Sam was saying was valuable? I'm disagreeing with it, and I'm putting it in a way which maybe sounds as though I'm using the word value, but I think the fact that I'm here and focusing so much on what is happening is giving a value to what is being said. I felt agreeing with Doug's point that when there's a real content in the context of that real situation, then we can look at these protocol points. But to look at the protocols in themselves, not in context, to me is less valuable. Now, that's not saying that this is of no value. And I, from my heart, Sam, I was not saying that what you were saying was of no value. And I'm sorry that you heard it that way.
Not necessarily just that it was of no value. I don't think that was what I was bristling at. What I was bristling at was you're saying that it was not a personal experience, that it was very abstract and mental. That's what I was bristling at. That you felt that it was not a real experience for me and that you hadn't recognized that it had happened.
I don't think I said that either. I recognize that you've had this experience many times. And that's what you said, that it has happened many times. And I agree with that. I don't think I denied that.
We got recordings for this.
Yeah, we can look. What I was saying was it wasn't happening right at that moment in the context of something you know, that you hadn't actually given an instant of it happening. You gave an instant of it happening in the past, but not of in the present. Now you've given an instant of it being in the present with Tammy, but at the time you didn't. To me, that was an important distinction. I guess other people didn't feel that that was an important distinction. Other people felt that what you were saying was expressing a truth about yourself or about your experience, which was fine. Yeah, the distinction that I was making maybe was, you know, too fine a distinction.
I have a expression of a game that I thought of about a couple years ago called Hand Up, Stand Up. And it was an idea of how to, in a group, feel what was meant to say next. So I've been trying to figure out how to do it in this form as well, and we kind of do by putting our hand up. But in a in-person group, I was thinking if we had a group of people that really wanted to have a generative conversation that went with the will of the group in an effort to outpicture or show the emergent process, that the next person could in a group, first it would be hand up for who would be speaking next. Then the next stage of, I feel like my point is really next, would be to stand up, and then to hand up, stand up, so that you could see in a group this kind of metric of, I've got something, wait, I've really got something, no, it's my turn. You know, and this way to be able to, in our bodies and physically be able to know how we can drive a conversation with what we feel inside is the next important thing to say. And I just think that this line of inquiry is really, really important and speaks to some of what it is when people come here and don't feel like their pieces are received. And part of that is in how we do receive people and how we listen and what we hear and the tensions that arise when we feel like we weren't heard. And some of that is language, and some of that is our own personal lenses and what we find important. But this is all a way of understanding together how to navigate. And I think that the most important thing, or a really important line of inquiry and consideration, is how we each choose to listen to make our point or to listen to understand, which are two different ways of participating in a conversation. And I think that in terms of my deeper gender considerations, my internal male self wants to make a point. My internal female side wants to listen to understand. And so I move between those polarities, but I feel that when I'm modeling that new way of being that I'm listening to understand, because that's more in service to the group and isn't me planting my little thing in the sand saying it must be, you have to hear my point here. And I think that from that place, a lot of tensions arise that we need to figure out ways to be with differently, respectfully, and you know, it's a good place for protocols, or at least to understand it better.
I just want to make a point that I think Sam could quite easily make, or something that anyway I feel I've learned from Sam, is that there aren't just these two polarities, that there are lots of different ways that we can.
Hop in. So I think that Tammy's point, awesome, Tammy, and maybe it's that maybe adopting structure, and I know that there's a meeting now on Tuesdays, but maybe if, say, we did like an 80-20, we tried 80% of the meetings, we tried to structure a bit, 20% we did freeform, I don't know, something like that. I'm just wondering in my mind if structure would help a bit here, but not to overly structure. So I'm just adding a second voice to that, Tammy. Maybe we can find, like, Google's 80-20, right? So 80% of the time you're working for Google, 20% of the time you're just throwing it out there. Maybe that could help structure, especially if it gets tense. Structure can help us kind of pull through, right? At least for me in my life. If things get kind of chaotic, I stick to structure.
If I may, Aaron, I think that's what Harry's proposal was. And much of what we're trying to figure out is, who is it and how do we make that agreement? Which goes even underneath that proposal of structure or protocol, which is, how do we even agree? And that's a question that has been asked before. And we can say, oh, well, thumbs up if we want sociocracy. Well, wait a minute. How much discussion went into that thumbs up or thumbs down? This is why I keep saying voting is one of the worst ways of making decisions. Anyway, so that's one response to you. Second response, again, using my practice, is going back to Tammy's point about how we look at ways of being and having these new ways of having conversations and making these observations. It is actually quite startling to me that it's been probably a very, very long time, probably just set a record for how much time went by before we heard from Doug. And I've been just thinking that Doug has been remarkably silent.
Yeah, you noticed that, huh?
I noticed that too.
So, generatively staying in the game in the face of sort of chaos, which is, we got a taste of chaos, for me involved presence and listening really closely. And the question of choice in the moment of reaction or response is like this wild card minefield. And every single person is bringing their own thing, and no two are alike. And there's this like fiction that there are a whole array of things where the presumption is my understanding is the same as your understanding is the same as somebody else's understanding, even to the point of using same words and seeming and apparently being in agreement, and in fact never checking in to find out that, holy crap, I had a cat in mind, you had a dog in mind, and Anna had a leopard in mind, and we weren't even talking about the same thing at all. And so for me, and I'm gonna reference and frame this from a Harry action place and get, very clear and direct. I know Anna. I've been Sam, in your seat where Anna responded to me in a way where it was like, wait a second, I don't think I said that. But I knew Anna and the frame from which that came. And for me, very much about, at some point, I'd love to have a sidebar with her, like explore that and drill down on that. And we have these little things like unconditional love. That was terrific in a thread. And I have a sense, and I know you, and I've reached out to say, love to do a one-on-one with you, because I have a ton of stuff I'd love to share with you that I think you might find valuable around what happened here, like why what happened here happened. And so that's my generative instinct in this domain, in this part of it, that it's very much about, it's very much a one-to-one thing. And that in the context of this group as a generative collaboration under a directive meme in terms of, figuring out saving the world, that the piece of this conversation that resonates to me for this frame in terms of the Thursday and Sunday sessions was really Tammy's gem around that idea of one thought at a time, one contribution at a time. Slow it down, start with one at a time, and then let's see whether we can evolve to doing more than that effectively. Roll over, all crawl before we walk, walk before we run. Like that is very rubber meets the road concrete as a, looking at something fresh and figuring something out and getting our arms around that as a practice. I think there's a fork for me. And when I say a fork, I mean, I think there's a predicate and basis for a session or the spawning of a session that focuses around this kind of chaos and disruption in the field. Because this is fundamentally human. It is absolutely unavoidable. It has been the bane and path to destruction of more collaborations, collectives, aggregations and efforts in the past to work together and create solutions and get to contributing than I can think of anything else. And the way we as a collective respond to you, to Anna, to that moment is something that we need to figure out better. Like there's got to be another way of approaching that and orienting around it, and that honors the feelings of the people that go to a feeling place or are triggered to a feeling place, but that also very quickly puts a floor under it to stop it from escalating and growing, and to shift it into inquiry and learning, right? Which is what that's about. Like, so if something reactive, I'm on the receiving end of something reactive, the reflex for me is, that's interesting. What button was pushed? What's that about? What's going on for me? It's an internal inquiry. But also collaboratively, for somebody who hasn't developed that mechanism, how can they be supported in learning how to do that rotation, right? So, but that's a separate conversation and thread. It is a huge one that I would love us to put on our table, and isn't necessarily this, which is sort of the mothership coffee table conversation from which stuff generates and forks out, if that makes sense. And I'm complete, but that's what I think.
So I would love to put on our table that we consider turning either one or both of our coffee table clash sessions into something that is more specific and is moving our purpose here forward.
Okay, could you give a specific and concrete idea of how you would like to see that then?
So I note that I have heard from several people that their work has not been seen or heard to the degree that they would like. So perhaps one or both of our sessions could do some form of people sharing their work. And so Doug and I had an offline conversation a couple weeks back, and I suggested it would be great to do his values audit. So it not just about the download of people's work, but the activities that show and explore that work as a path for us to follow. So I've heard from folks in different ways that really identifying our values would be great. So a session where Doug would walk us through his values audit might be a very useful one. Another one would be to really go through collaborology and all of those pieces so that that is actually received and can move closer to adoption by the group. Because I think that that's the gap that that Sam has been experiencing in presenting his work, is that there's a gap between having it fully heard, because it's in this open generative coffee clatch space, rather than something that's focused on, received, respected, inquired into, and towards pieces of that being adopted into our process. So those are two examples, but the heart of it is for us to understand what we each are bringing to the table that's in service to the group.
I would
really
very
like
much.
that.
Sorry, Glenn. I would just
I just
very
said
much
I'd
like.
to.
What did you say?
I just said that I like that idea. That's all. Go ahead.
I would like to have a group that Doug was suggesting, which is focusing on these sort of clashes and the emotional buttons that they push. That seems to me really important. And I also thought that the Tuesday sessions were places where people could present their work. Wasn't that what that was about?
Yes, those are the barn raising sessions, yes.
What does barn racing mean? I don't really understand that.
Sort of platform specific, building things oriented, very concrete, real, like platforms, resources to support in a new way.
Yes, as the American traditional way of people wanting to have a barn, they would gather everybody in one day and they raise one barn in a day. So that's barn raising is about. You come together, do collective, one purpose, one focus, one thing, and then you finish together, and when it's done and you have a big party. But the point is you all do whatever you can, whether it's bringing the drinks or hammering the nails into it or push or whatever. But that's collaboration work. And that's barn raising is the concrete, specific collaboration. And I can just do one thing at a time, so you need to organize. That's my addition to it. Thank you.
But what I heard in Tammy's suggestion was that there was on the one hand, there has emerged this issue of being heard and sharing our things, generally speaking, and then collaborology, and what Anna said also about these tensions. So I feel that's very, yeah, maybe collaborology could be one term for all of it, but I think it's very, I don't really feel that that's something that's emerged also here, all of those things.
Can I make a suggestion off of where Tammy went? What if Sunday were what Anna presented and suggested in terms of exploring buttons as a conversation, and as a first conversation that could by the end either be a last conversation or could be the beginning of a dedicated thread to that issue, and how do we evolve new perspectives, approaches, and understandings and ways of relating to and dealing with that. And so let Sunday be sort of a first bite at that apple as a dedicated thing. Tuesday is there for for show and tell. I think I sort of did that spontaneously just because I was so freaking pregnant with it that it was like, I want to get this out. The CMM doc that I shared, just to say, okay, I want to, get this in front of everybody. I don't know whether anybody's looked at it or has any interest in it, but I sort of like got that pressure off. But I relate to Tuesday as sort of the place for me to get up to speed with everybody else's and hopefully have an opportunity to share mine and to see whether we can pick amongst all of that and find a cohesive vision and path forward, or evolve one and co-create one. The Thursday for me being undesignated blank check is really appealing and valuable to me. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way, and it's subject to everybody's feelings about it. But that's sort of the the place where generative Jungian stuff can come out of left field and create a new fork, create a new, this is an issue, this is a challenge, or this is a need, or this is something we could dig into that really deserves time, attention, and focus. So those are my thoughts.
And maybe also that Thursday one could explore Aaron's suggestion of having 2080 structure. I don't really have a clear idea of what sort of thing you're talking about, but perhaps you could, for one of those sessions, just to see what that is about.
Sure, I'll lace that in. Anyone can lace it in, structure and things like that, or anything. It's already there. I was kind of trying to see if half of what I was saying was whether or not in the moment structure could have helped us if we were having problems. That was half of what I was saying too. So,
what was there any special kind of structure you were thinking about?
Well, nothing in particular. I suppose that we could more so embark on a deliberative process of, and it sounds like that's been going on from what Sam and Harry said too. So, always imperfect information here. So I don't want to stumble in and say, oh, just do this, right? I know that everyone's trying to figure out how to do it. So, but I don't know if there is a deliberative conversation on, Lumio is kind of standard, for instance, kind of a sociocratic consent. I have a good amount of belief in that, but there's all kinds of caveats and all kinds of ways it can go wrong and right, and it can choke out the spirit from really coming out. And so, yeah, anyway. Heiner, I really like Heiner's Magic Roundtable too. I'm just going to plug that. Heiner's Magic Roundtable, plug in it.
So, Doug, in giving a little bit of metaphor to what you were just saying, I think of this as well. If Thursdays is the more open forum where we just meet and figure out what emerges, to me that sounds like kind of a town square kind of a opportunity. You know, we all sort of meet there. In China, by the way, people build houses not to have living rooms or big dens or whatever. They're basically so cramped that they have nothing, no space other than where to cook and where to sleep. But the recreation is to go to the town square, and that's where they meet people. That's where they have their conversation, their strolls, you know, meet neighbors, catch up on news. So to me, I get that town square feel from what you're proposing. And I think that's what Sundays and Thursdays has been. And if we're talking about repurposing Sunday for something to really look at triggers, look at where we are engaged in blocks for myself or whatever else, do that sort of Jungian shadow work, to me, that's an inherently crucial component of collaborology. And I'm actually ecstatic that that proposal has come forth. So if we want to use Sundays for that, I'm there. If we want to use Tuesdays for barn raising, I'm there. If we want to use Thursdays for open town square, I'm there.
You just don't quit, do you?
I said not until I'm kicked out.
Yeah. But are we then talking about for Sundays to have a theme which is announced beforehand, similar to the conversational experiments? Because I mean, even if it is announced a theme, there's still infinite amount of freedom within it and generative potential. So I don't see that as any restriction. But like, who should formulate the theme? I mean, sometimes one person just comes with a suggestion and it just hits home run. It just feels right, at least when the group is this small. Or it's also possible that one person could have the responsibility of formulating a theme for the Sunday. Next time it's another one, but still to formulate it with the whole group field in mind. So I don't know what your thoughts on that is.
Can I say something? I've been in a group that gathered monthly, if I remember well, and it's about presencing who you are and specifically focusing on your personal development. So that means looking at your shadows and addressing the tensions that are alive in you due to what you bring into the group or that present themselves in the interaction. And that has always been very helpful and valuable to me. And if that is the kind of meetings we would like to have on Sundays, then we don't need an agenda. You just need to bring yourself, be present with what is, and share what you feel that needs sharing and needs to be seen because it's attention in you or in the group. With that, I'm complete.
I want to I just have a question, because part of a sort of overlay for me on these pieces of the puzzle is, I think Sunday is about that, but with a twist for me, or I would suggest it be about that with a twist for me. The sort of directive or imperative I feel in terms of this group is mapping to finding new and better ways of doing this in service to learning and propagating, like actually coming up with stuff that has the potential to be useful, be valuable, and go out into the world. And so the distinction I would make, Harry, in terms of what you just described and what I was thinking and suggesting it when I suggested it, was it's less about I'm going there to do shadow work and for me. It's more about the dynamic of, in the context of collaboration, when people come together, how do we relate to, look at, and orient differently in the face of shadow eruptions and disruptions by and between individuals? So the distinction in my mind is between the I'm going to work on me versus I'm going to look at shadow, shadow eruption and emergence as a field disrupting thing, and something that we hopefully could co-create and figure out a new practice, way, approach, perspective, and understanding of in collaborative context to do differently, or to respond to differently, or in the context of platform design, instantiate a signaling mechanism and platform facilitated approach to handling and dealing with in the moment, to minimize disruption, to minimize escalation of negative or adverse feelings, and to get back on track. So there is a very like rubber meets the road mechanistic kind of thing going on for me behind all of this. How does it map to us, helping fix something that is a challenge of human beings being human beings?
1,000% agree.
That's a little different.
Yeah.
I just need to leave.
Very different.
So bye everybody, and thank you for.
Bye, Anna.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, Doug, I like the way you phrased that for Sundays, and I'm completely on board with that. It's definitely in the context of what we can be doing in service of this larger purpose.
Yeah.
I'm a little unclear on it. And part of what I heard is that we're focusing on the negative and what's not working. Now, I know that's probably not what's being said, but that's what I heard. So I'd like some clarification.
I'll take a stab. When people come together to collaborate, to co-create, there's a lot of room and potential for mode of communication to push buttons, to trigger emotional reactivity in others. That's a fundamental reality of the human condition, and probably underlies wars, slaughters, genocides, all sorts of horrors that have been perpetrated through history. But the bottom line is that how we could explore doing that differently, handling that differently in collaborative spaces and efforts is the question. And so it's not focusing on the negative as much as it is putting arms around and looking at things that are either disruptive, counterproductive, or violative of field and generativity and learning and moving forward. Because when those disruptions happen, they're very, very, we're acclimated to them, but the truth of the matter is that's real violence. It's traumatic, absolutely traumatic. That's the definition of what those buttons are about for whoever the individual is who experiences being pushed. And so it does not serve collaborative endeavor for people to experience a moment of effectively of trauma or violence, and not come up with better tools and mechanisms and orientations around how the collective is going to respond to that immediately. I mean, the vision that I carry around this, by the way, is that when that happens, everything else stops, all hands on deck. Because the imperative of the collective supporting each individual has to take priority on a human being level, on an energy level, over anything else. It's got to be the top of the pyramid. Because to admit or allow of any subordination of that to anything else is a slippery slope that goes right to where we are now, where screw the consequences, screw the damage and harm, full speed ahead. So you have to decide, like, yes or no. It's okay or it's not okay. And if it's not okay, then how do we build that in? How do we bake it in? From a place of love, not fear, not scarcity, not whatever. Clearly. And it also happens to be the single most powerful phenomenology from the standpoint of where most people go in the face of it. It's hugely uncomfortable for most people. And for most, it's terrifying or scary. It really goes and creates chaos and propagates it. And that's not something to pull back and heal quickly. Like, that takes time, it takes energy, caring. So the more the scale of the trauma and the significance of the impact can be, caught and have a floor put under it and shifted, the faster that can happen, the less damage and destruction it just can be minimized. So it's not focusing on negative, it's really focusing on how do we relate and deal and handle and approach the fact of that reality happening, because it happens and will happen. And we don't have any tool for handling that. It's really like everybody goes off a cliff. And sometimes it gets the snowball gets rolling and it just is hugely disruptive and destructive and kills everything in sight. And sometimes it can be pulled back, but it should not be unconsciously left to happen. It's like, leaving bombs around, you can go ahead and defuse.
%1,000%. I think this is what keeps teams or communities from forming or tears them apart once they're actually formed. And if we could, I'm reminded of Marianne Williamson's statement on this. Everything is either done from love or done in search of love. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And by the way, I don't think we have to seed that Sunday conversation with any given topic. I think there's a lot already.
Well, this is the topic. the generative, exploration will take care of itself. There are a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. And by the way, Doug, when you were talking about the things that keep us in the way of being this way, top of the list for me is the sense of urgency. Sense of urgency trumps this in so many ways.
It's the single biggest tool of enslavement and depowering and de-affirming of the industrial frame. The clock rules.
Yes.
The trains run on time. You have to. And holy shit. And it's not true. Fuck that. Pardon my French. But it's just not true. They made that up. They made that up. They put the clock on the wall and said, here's your ticket for your life. It's like, no, I don't think so.
But even for ourselves, if we're not careful, we put that clock on ourselves.
It's programmed. We're imprinted and programmed by the culture. Unlearning that, it took forever. It took forever.
And by the way, just one more question. I am really going to review this particular session in quite some detail. And I'm not sure that we've actually practiced it yet, but one of the questions I'll be asking in my mind is how many of each of our shares was a single meme share? And how many could have been single meme shares? And how many could not have been? Over.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. What do you mean?
Tammy's thing about one idea at a time as a potential idea for practice. And looking back at this and sort of analyzing it and going, you know, are there things that cannot comply with that almost definitionally? Like they just have to be multiples. Or it don't, you know, you can't even express it. But that's a really interesting question and analysis worth doing, like where the rubber meets the road around the idea. I'd love the answer to that question.
Well, that's a problem for me at least. I really have a problem with that. One thing at a time, because in my mind everything is connected to everything else. But it's very interesting. I mean, I love it. One little thing about this with shadow work, what I heard here was shadow work and emotional triggers and this whole process related to this, which sometimes can create trouble. But if we can figure out a way to transform it, there has to be an incredible power in it. And one thing which came to my mind with shadow work was something I heard Ken Wilber say about shadow work. He was asked to define it, and I thought he had a beautiful answer. What he said was that when there's a process of evolution through many stages, there's sometimes the process moves faster through different stages, and then there's a sort of residue of old habits, if you like, or old reactions, and they don't quite disappear, and there can be this cognitive dissonance, an inner conflict between different sides of my nature, and it can happen individually as well as collectively. So we may have certain ideals, and then suddenly there's a reaction which comes from that gut or primal, or just some memory is triggered. It just comes so fast. It just that's a rich topic, and if we can make progress there, I mean that we're really doing work for the benefit of the whole world, no question about it.
I'm kind of reminding myself, but possibly also asking the group, you know, we're not necessarily the experts on shadow work. There's a lot of insights that others have that have come before us. And so there's a question in my mind about whether when we take this on for Sundays, Are we retreading, reinventing old ground? Or are we really doing something new? I have really no answer to that. This is a sincere question. And I'm really wondering how we, for the group, for the community, and for future members of this group, how do we approach this in the most generative and directional way?
A practical way is to be schedule first Sunday, see who's present and what they can bring, what they already have from experience or context or links or whatever, and then you would take the next step. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I just want to, I'm not sure that we need to go there. And I do shadow work with people. I mean, as a coach, I do it as a teacher of a workshop. I have my gestalt, and there are all sorts of people with all sorts of others. And there are as many variations and leaves on the tree as you can shake a stick at. And they're all valuable as long as they speak to a person who derives the gold from them, like it's in the eye of the recipient, receiver, beneficiary, right? To me, our inquiry isn't necessarily about an individual and their shadow work and state of awareness, lack of awareness, work, non-work, whatever. Our inquiry is, how do we deal with the ramifications and consequences of pre-existing shadows as they relate to an impact and effect playing and working with others collaboratively? It's like in that moment where the rubber meets the road experientially, and how does a collective respond to that thing? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's what's important in terms of doing us differently. It's how we relate to that moment and that person. It's not about being diffuse in that focus and going into, okay, are we responsible for taking that person into a shadow work process or forking them into as part of our umbrella or mandate or agenda? The truth is that there's a universe out there for that. We don't need to go there. And the solution we cook shouldn't be oriented toward processing somebody out of it, because that's not the place of this, that's not the time of this, and that's not the forum of it, right? That's sort of where things went today. And the truth of the matter is that powerful, valuable, important, but not here, not now, and the truth of the matter is being clear about the boundaries and the domains is everything. And I'd love to be able to help. If I can share an anecdote, I don't know where people, and I hate to go long. There's a guy who was a very close friend. He was a crossing guard for my kids. My father died, his wife died, and we met right then at Christmas. It was like perfect storm of connection and bonding. And he had a decompensation event that had landed him in the hospital when his wife was alive. And he had been feeling pretty good. And 10 years later, fast forward the tape, and he and I are friends. And I get a call from his girlfriend that, he's under the covers at his house and he's decompensated again. And I went down there and I bundled him up and I brought him home, and I set him up in our living room, and I got him up in the morning, made sure he was getting up in the morning, and his girlfriend would come take him for a walk. And I put a floor under it and knew that if that could be sustained for 6 weeks and 8 weeks until the meds that he was supposed to be taking, that his primary care physician had co-conspired with him to stop taking, kicked in, he could pick back up with his life. He had a job, he had a car, he had an apartment, he had everything. his son came in, and we were in family, and I handed him off to his son, brought him back to his apartment where his son had come into town and was staying. And his son was in the mental health field, and I assumed he would step in and pick up the ball. And my wife and I had a scheduled vacation, and we went away, and I came back to find out that his son co-enabled him. The bottom dropped out, and he was hospital and into a perfunctory 2-week thing, and then discharged back under the covers at his house. And without the floor, the drop is deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and the potential for recovery and return to base disappears relatively quickly. And the whole mental health system has no consciousness or recognition of this idea. Not even like part of the literature. It's just not even part of the game. You know, everything is entropic. Oh, you started here, you dropped to here, we're going to pick you up here and keep you here. It's insane. So this is the same kind of thing. This is the same kind of thing that I think, you know, in the face of the most horrendous trauma, if somebody can just be drowned with love and support and healing, that the impact, the long tail impact of the trauma can be dramatically shortened, can move them much faster to a place of wholeness and being okay, and the trauma not being their story and not afflicting them the rest of their lives. So.
Doug, as you're telling that story, what comes to mind is a meme that I heard about African villages when some of their members act out in ways that are either extreme in depression or violence or psychopathy or something like that. I was told that these villages all surround the person and say, when did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing? You know that meme? That's what comes to mind.
Tribal wisdom, man. They had it all figured out. We just have to claw our way back.
I wonder, Tammy, what are you thinking about this? Because you gave an impression that you didn't quite understand it before. To me, what Doug said made a lot of sense. You just looked a little confused, so I just
I guess what I'm hearing is that it's important to, and I agree, I just get a bit of push from it. So it doesn't pull me as much as it pushes me. So I'm drawn by my commitment to stay in, but I'm concerned in the same way that I'm concerned in any kind of conversation that we consistently go to the points that we don't understand and don't stay with what is coherent as a practice. I'm hearing to focus on where we're going off kilter and figure out, I don't know, maybe I don't still understand. But I'm hearing it as a fair amount of emotional labor. I'm at my maximum for that sort of thing. I have enough of it in my life. But I also think it's important to do. So if I think about hanging every Sunday on dealing with people's emotional, the group's emotional shadow, you know, I feel a bit of push rather than pull. Doug had a one-to-one session with me last week where he was talking about, you know, the different parts of me, and where I kind of conflate my desire, my soul's purpose to be able to lift up people and to be able to be an interviewer, a person that is holding space for someone to share their stuff, with being a member of a group, right? So I'm just thinking how I can tease that out. This is group work, really important group work, and I, you know, obviously the barriers to full coherent outpictured thought of a group is useful to me. I am getting a little tired of pushing big rocks up a mountain. So I need to balance this kind of emotional labor that we're talking about with deeply generative, joyful service to people that want to have their stuff heard, because that's where I feel I want to put my energy. So maybe it's a Friday session where I open it up to the group of who wants, you know, a couple of people maybe that want to have their stuff profiled and where their work intersects, and that a group may want to support those two people in being seen and heard, because I see that as ongoing work that can help to serve the group. So yeah, I'm just really deeply considering how we can take some actions together, how we can deal with these stoppage points in our collective development together. And that's where I see this suggestion for Sunday to work on the shadow work of being in service to. And really knowing each other. Like, I feel like it would be really useful for people, including all of us who would be motivated, to having a group of people hold space and ask questions about their pieces so that it can be understood, and it can be supported. So yeah, maybe there's a fourth day that wants to be scheduled for the week.
I'm all for that too. By the way, I can't participate on Tuesdays next week. I really like that.
You can't participate Tuesdays?
No. Sorry.
It's interesting. If I could comment on that, maybe a fourth day is a good place, because I hear you on that one, Tammy. But I'm wondering whether or not I understood Doug, or because I kind of had the almost feeling that it was somewhat emotional labor prevention. I don't think we were going to be digging into, you know, all of our wounds, you know, because really, I'm with you on that one. But more so, you know, just kind of like, how can we try to miss the potholes next time? How can we try to just kind of like toolkit, and actually being somewhat abstract there? Like, let's not do case that. I would see it as probably not try to examine anything in the past, and you know, like, let's not do that, and just go forward thinking abstractly, kind of. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Yeah. See, my way of understanding it is just recognizing when shadow appears, and then trying to figure out how do we unblock the group from that, rather than having it suck down all of our time and energy and focus.
Yes, we once had a conversation experiment about being stuck that is still online. It's worthwhile watching. We can be stuck as a group, and of course the group's all individuals. You can be stuck as an individual, which gets the group stuck to mind, and then we can experiment with that.
So rather than focusing on the shadow aspect of it, if we ask the question, how do we unblock ourselves so that we can actually move as fast as possible? Maybe that's a good way to frame it. And then we each have ideas already, I'm sure, in our minds, what could have been more optimal in any of these past conversations.
I think unblocking, I'm going to throw in, I think unblocking is cool, because that's kind of the more general, and then we're going to find the emotional things, then we'll find just purely logistical things in there too, lots of, yeah. Does it deserve a whole day though? I think, or
okay. Good enough for me.
Explore. We have a Sunday as a first toe in the water, and we'll, it's sort of like the bear. Why did the bear go over the mountain? To see what he could see. So let's see generatively where it goes and what comes out of it. It could just be that's enough, and it could be that's the beginning of a thread that evolves and emerges into something really rich and generative.
Okay, so let's agree that at least one Sunday we'll do this, and we'll see whether or not there's a need for more.
Well, what about Tammy's idea of a Friday session? I'm very interested in that, actually, for just really going into the depths of the specific ideas of specific people. I also really love that idea, and I would certainly want to be part of that. Fridays would work great for me, actually.
Okay, I would propose the law of 2 feet together with your own initiative. So if anybody has an idea, like Timmy's idea on Friday or the Sunday idea, then you say, okay, here's the time, here you're welcome, I am there, I will be there, and then the participants want to join, they join. And if nobody comes, that's a message in itself as well.
Who's going to try to, what we've just said here, who's going to try to distill it into one paragraph, or should I do it and try to say, okay, Sunday's this, Thursday's this, Tuesday's this. Should I do it? Does anyone else want to do it? Or
I'm taking notes in the chat. Can you see?
Sounds like you're motivated. I support it, Aaron.
All right, one paragraph I can do it. Yeah. Tell me if anything's off or anything. Yeah, please.
And I'll suggest 3 o'clock on Friday, because I think that time is open for me tomorrow. And I'll do some, I'll do some thinking and a little write-up about it as well.
And where do we find those write-ups and proposals and invites?
I'll put it on the page, on our Facebook page.
Are you talking about 3 o'clock your time?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be 6 Eastern US.
So that's later for European people, but allows the folks in New Zealand and Australia to join.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
What time is 3 p.m. PST for Harry and Glenn and Aaron? Are you guys are one time zone apart, some of you? Yeah.
It's midnight, which is not that bad. It's okay.
Is it midnight?
If it fits in people in Australia, why not?
Yeah, I can do that if it's on Friday.
So Glenn, it's midnight on Friday. That's what you said.
Is it? But it's
CET. It's a 9-hour difference. So 3 p.m. Pacific would be midnight Central European, which I might not make that actually, but I think it's good to have something for the Aussies and the Kiwis.
So can we?
If I just threw it,
so could we hang the title Show and Tell on Friday, on the Friday session?
I'd like to do some thinking about it, and it could be, but I'm thinking about a specific form which is a little different from what we're doing, but I'd like to do a little more thinking about it. I'm considering, so just my thoughts right now are, would it be useful for one person to be kind of the focal presenter, or would it be good to have 2 people who are presenting and we're finding the points of complementarity or contention between them, with a group of people participating in coming to understanding? So I'm looking at those 2 as potential ways. and part of that is to bridge from the TED Talks way of the way of conversation to what we're doing here, which is the full generative everyone's peers. I'm looking at a model that's in between that as a bridge, so that people have the time and space to be able to share what they're bringing, and there is a respect and honoring of one or two people, and the others are looking to support, understand, co-develop, and deeply consider what's being presented. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, I would say, Tammy, if I might suggest, I'd say you have full authority to basically define the format on Fridays and run with it, kind of as, let me propose this. Let's say Thursday is a very open, no lead, everybody participates, co-equals kind of a conversation. The unblocking, I'm nominating, hey, Doug, maybe you're a guy that actually doesn't present it, but maybe moderates it. And on Tuesdays, I'm not presenting barn raising, but I'm maybe guiding and moderating that, because I think I was one kind of wanted to put that in the calendar and see if people showed up. So I'm saying if we have these 4 events now, Thursday's open, Friday Tammy, Sunday, at least for once, Doug, Tuesdays, barn raising, I'll moderate, at least until we decide to do something better. Maybe that's one way to summarize that paragraph.
And I wonder if 2 p.m. on Friday would work better for our European friends. That's like 11 at night rather than midnight.
Yeah.
What's the name of your time zone, Tammy?
PST.
Pacific.
Specific.
I've
Just
never been there. It doesn't mean anything to me.
What's that?
I've never been there, so there's a PST. Okay, thank you.
California time, basically. Vancouver time.
Pacific Standard Time.
Los Angeles time. San Francisco
That
time.
would certainly work better.
Yeah.
For me too. Yeah.
Okay, let's call tomorrow's session at 2 then.
All right.
We'll see how that works.
I was going to say, I like, Sam, how you structured that in the end, because you're not creating too many dependencies across, so that if one drops, still more will continue. I like that. Good architect.
Yeah. Redundancy.
Well,
I think I'm about to run.
Yeah, feels like we're coming to a closure. It's been a good session.
I feel we're kind of each running out of gas. At least I am.
Yeah. It is tiring, but it also brings a lot of energy. So that's the way it should be.
Look, if I might say something to Harry and Tammy,
it's tiring in the right way.
I get that some of this, in fact, there's moments in every conversation that, aren't exactly, in resonance with what we each want to do. But I really want to thank Harry, Tammy, for saying that it was, kind of off center for you guys, but still plugging in there, because to me, staying here through the difficult times is what don't quit means. And if we're here not quitting each other, we're going to go through some difficult times. I'm going to go through, maybe I went through it. Yes, I did go through a difficult time today. Okay. And yet, you're all there for me. I'm going to be there for you guys when this happens, with each of you guys. And this is what it means when I really put it, very simply, don't quit. I'm not quitting unless you guys kick me out. Okay. That's the caveat. Thank you. Thank you.
Me too.
Me too.
Yeah, for better or for
Me too.
till death do my part. Okay.
I don't even think you can quit, to be honest. I mean, it's just, I think that's it. We're just saying, we're all part of this thing. I don't know how I would quit. So I'm here, man.
Glad to see you here, Aaron.
Yeah.
Thank you all for today.
Yes.
This is definitely something I'm going to review later.
Some seriously good work. Well, I'm going to go walk dogs. They're sitting here with their legs crossed. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Love y'all.
Take
Bye.
care. Take care.